Good to have Shabbos, everyone. Shabbos Chol Hamoed Sukkos. So, short fart on Sukkos that we learned this morning. Very, very powerful from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says like this. We talk about Sukkos. It says, Teishfu ke'ein tadur. You have to live in the Sukkah as if you live there. At the same time, we know the halacha is that a Sukkah needs to be a diras arai. It has to be a temporary residence. If you do certain things halachically that make the Sukkah to be too permanent, so then it's not a kosher sukkah. For instance, if the schach is above 20 amas, according to some opinions, and there's other things, obviously, that if you make it too homey, too permanent, it's not a kosher sukkah. At the same time, the halacha is that you have to do everything in the sukkah. You have to live in the sukkah as if it's your permanent residence. So it's a contradiction. Is it temporary or is it permanent? So the Rebbe here says an amazing idea, and this is an idea that's about sukkahs and an idea about life, and why does this message come in sukkah specifically after Yom Kippur, etc. The Rebbe says that when it comes to life, when we go out to the world, especially it's come after Rosh Hashanah, and we kind of wiped away everything from the past, we're able to say we want a fresh start. We're going into the new year. So we look at the world, and we could sometimes get caught up in the same things that tripped us up in the past, which is that we look at the world and we get overwhelmed, and we see the world as this is a permanent place. The world is permanent the way we see it in its physicality, whether it's the limitations of health, wealth, parnasa, in other anxieties, other things that we look at, and we say this is the way it is. This is the fact. This is the permanent. This is what's real. And then we act accordingly sometimes, and maybe against our best interests, and especially against what Hashem wants. So that we have to understand that this world is like a sukkah. It's an arai. It's temporary. First of all, we have, of course, this is just the Olam Hazeh, this Olam Haba. Like Yaakov says to Esav, I have two worlds, you have one world. But aside from that, this arai meaning is not real. The only reason why it exists is because Hashem puts it in existence. If Hashem's word of Dvar Hashem would leave the world for a second, like the Alter Rebbe explains in the second part of Tanya, the world would cease to exist. It needs a constant fusion of life from Hashem to keep it in its existence, even though its existence gives off the impression that it's self-sustained and the world is something emes. So but nevertheless, Hashem says that where does He want to be found? Where does Amitis Amimtso? Where is the truth of Hashem want to be found? Where is Hashem's dira? Where does God want a home? And a home means that this is where He lives. This is where His whole essence is specifically in this world. Why? Because the idea is that once you've come to understanding that the world is actually arai, the world is actually temporary, then Hashem says, I want you to go and take that world that's temporary and use all its parts, not just to house godliness, but to make it a place of godliness. Meaning, like we say, l'shem yichud kucha brichu shchinta, like we say before every mitzvah, we say to unite kucha brichu, what's a kodesh, what's separate, with shchina. Shchina means the presence of Hashem here in this world. So the idea is that when we recognize the world for being temporary, then we look at the world and say, what do we have over here? What kind of things do we have? All the gashmis, the physicality. Not only is it going to house a place for us to daven, for us to learn, but we're actually going to turn the physical things into godliness. And that's the message we get from the sukkah. And where do we draw this energy from? That a person should be able to lift themselves up, to look at the world in such a way, is after Yom Kippur, when we say 7 times, Hashem Hu Elikim, what we're telling ourselves is, that Elohim, that what we look at as Teva, as nature, we have to know it's Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's above nature, that's nature. Hashem created and designed it so. So through our avodah, la'avda, l'shamra, like when we read about in Parshas Bereshis, is to create the place and make it into a diras keva, bar keva, a place of permanence for Hashem. And through taking the gashmis, and taking the physical things, and making a mitzvah out of it, then that's the idea of going into the new year. That's the idea of creation. And the amazing thing is, for instance, although a person is supposed to do everything in the sukkah, we learn in the sukkah, we do other things in the sukkah, but when do we make a bracha on the sukkah? When we eat physical things. If a person comes into the sukkah and opens a sefer, you don't make a bracha, leishav b'sukkah. When is it called yeshiva? When is it called settling in the sukkah? Actually, when you do physical things in the sukkah, eating in the sukkah, etc. So when we have this idea that we look at the world and we recognize that our job is to turn the temporary into a physical resting place for Hashem, not just to house it, but to actually be through the physical things to make it a dwelling place for Hashem, then Hashem gives us the bracha. to be able to do it. He takes away all the obstacles, whether it's in health issues, whether it's in parnasa issues, and He blesses us with the Shana Tovim Sukkah. We should go out to the year like we're going to announce next week. But Yaakov goes on his way, marching out of the sukkah into the world to make it a dir b'tachtonim, good Yom Tov, and a good Shabbos.